Hey guys, I am Kristen Howerton and I blog at Rage Against the Minivan.
And I'm Paul Martin. I blog at Sophia.
Paul and I are old friends and we are both political junkies, and during the last election we decided to do a weekly kind of recap / debate about politics since we come from opposite sides. I am a socialist, Democrat.
And I am a Republican of the centrist nature.
Right. So even though we come from different sides of the aisle, we have definitely found in this election season and presidency that we are more on the same page than we ever were before.
And on a lot of social issues too. We
That's
seem
true.
to have a common ground
This is
on
true.
many of them.
Yeah. So today we have a ton to talk about. We're going to talk a bit about Russia. We want to talk about this whole thing with Pence rule coming out that, he doesn't meet alone with women or go to dinner alone with women. We have lots of thoughts on that because both Paul and I come from kind of church backgrounds and religious backgrounds that had that rule, and we've both lived that a little bit. And then we want to talk about the healthcare debacle and how that kind of fell flat, and Obamacare seems to be the rule of the land. Where do you want to start?
I don't know, but our main thing is to not be heady. There are a lot of you watching, and a lot of the stuff is complex, and you have to watch news channels, and we want to, I don't know, one of our goals is just to talk the people's language and just really make this something that you can send questions in, and we can just really have a conversation that isn't too political or too nuanced, because that's boring. I don't want to do that.
I completely agree. I mean, we are both political junkies, and we're both listening to podcasts and watching shows and all of that kind of stuff. But we want definitely want this to be an approachable conversation, and we also enjoy beverages while we chat.
We do.
Oh, speaking of which, before we dive in, we should ask the audience about the name.
Oh, the name.
The name.
Tell them, what are we going to do? Tell them our
Well,
plan.
so we want to do more of this, and this really started as a debate. Leading up to the election, and we thought we would be done after the election, but
we thought we would be on opposite sides.
We did. It turned out to be so different than what we expected.
Yeah.
And honestly, what I also thought was, after elections are over, you've got kind of 3 calm years where nobody's really interested in politics.
Absolutely.
And that is not what has happened, and it is. It's kind of a shit show. So we want to keep talking about it.
It will probably intensify.
It probably will.
Months ahead.
So we have a couple questions for you guys before we dive into our topics for the evening. First of all, what do you want to hear us talk about more? Because we talk about politics, obviously. I think we want to kind of, even in our agreement, still try to highlight what the differences are between the two of us. But Paul and I also both come from religious Christian backgrounds. And so we both have an interest in talking about faith. So do you want to hear us talk more about that? Would you prefer us to leave that out? And then we also have interest in social justice stuff.
Right.
So, what do you guys want to hear? We aim to please. We're curious to hear what you think we should talk more about. And then having said that, we need a name because
the podcast and all that.
Yeah. Oh, and we want to. So what we're going to try to do is both film this on Facebook Live, which seems to be, effective for many of you who are on Facebook. But we also want to start simultaneously doing podcasts because I know for some of us, podcasts are just easier to listen to. You can listen in the car or while you're grocery shopping. You don't have to be sitting at a screen. So anyway, we need to figure out a name for all of that, for all we're doing, because we have previously called this Right Mom. Wait, what were we calling it? Right Dad, Left Mom?
Right, or Up for Debate.
Oh, Up for Debate. We were calling it that. So I don't know. If you guys have a snazzier name for us, we are all ears.
And we love to talk about faith. We don't want it to be just about faith because many of you people might not be people of faith, which is totally cool, and I'm glad you're watching.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that, I know I have friends who aren't religious who are, sometimes a little interested in what we have to say because it helps them understand some of the context.
And with Trump and the reality we're in, so much of what's happening comes down to really, whether you're a person of faith or not, the issue of ethics. Yeah. What's right? Yeah. What's just the right thing to do? And so whether you're a believer or not, or whether you're a polytheist or monotheist or whatever, a lot of people in this country are grappling with what's the right thing to do, which leads us to a really kind of big topic that happened in the last few days with Mike Pence. I don't know if we want to jump there.
Jump
right.
in. Let's go there.
Do you want to preface it, or should I preface it with Billy Graham?
Yeah, you talk about Billy Graham because you guys may not know this, but he's a big fan.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Billy Graham.
Big fan.
Here's the deal. So here are a few reasons why. So there are a lot of evangelical leaders who have basically been embarrassments to every single Christian on the planet.
Yeah.
And I could say names like Jerry Falwell, and I'll just say that, like evangelical Christians who have
okay, for people who don't know, Jerry Falwell was a big preacher, traveled, had television appearances, and he had a massive sex scandal.
Yeah. And just, the televangelists that many of us have seen that have been embarrassment to tens of millions of Christians like Kristen and I. They just kind of want to hide under the pillow and say, they're not one of us. Billy Graham, to me, has always been a statesman. He's been able to meet with whether it be JFK or Bill Clinton on the left, or whether it be George Bush or Bob Dole on the right. He's someone who's been able to, out of his just basic decency, to put his political ideologies on the side. I also am remarkably intrigued with some of his theology. Even though he is a hardcore evangelist, he has been very open, saying that he thinks that Muslims, he thinks that people that are really God seekers could know God. And so as evangelical as he is, he also is a remarkably respectable
thinker. He's a thinker. Very smart.
And so anyway, I have high regard for him. And like any any Christian or religious leader, he has his flaws. And so years ago, the story is, he walks into a hotel room and there's some naked lady in the bed who wanted to bust him and seduce him into having an affair. And this is fairly well documented. And so evidently he, from that day forward, decided that he would forever make sure that he was never alone with a woman in a hotel, in a car, no matter what, because he had this international stage and it wasn't going to be tarnished by some, legitimately a freak that was going to try to be on the cover of some magazine. And
so this rule is, and this, scenario is widely known in Christian circles. And there are many, many evangelicals who follow this rule, both individually, that's a choice that people make in their marriage, but then there are many churches or Christian organizations that even require that of their staff, where they, maybe make you sign something, and the rule is that you are never alone with the opposite sex. So you can't go to coffee, you can't go to dinner, you can't close a door. And so evidently, Mike Pence also follows this rule, which is not the least bit surprising to me. When I heard that, I was like, of course, I'm sure he does. I mean, I feel like this was like, the whole world is like, what? And then evangelicals are like, yeah, that's not surprising. He's totally an evangelical. But, it's problematic. I mean, I think the rule itself is problematic, but it's particularly problematic for someone at his level and in politics. Yeah. And the idea was birthed out of this kind of New Testament, I think, idea of being above reproach. We need to be, as Christians, we need to be the light, we need to be the envy of the world, we need to be the kinds of people that everybody would look at and think, would never think anything negatively. So you would never be in a situation that would make anybody question anything. So if you're a pastor, you're not out at a candlelight dinner with the neighbor because someone might think something. So in a sense, in some kind of weird way, the motive was maybe good, but it went really far to the place where it became a legalistic, right? That's what you're saying. It became written into bylaws and churches. And absolutely. Yeah. And so, then it's super problematic because whatever position you're in, whether you're a pastor or in politics, I mean, for women, because women are usually the minority in these situations, it means that you can't really, you can't walk into your coworker's office and bend their ear alone, which is something that everybody does. You can't go out to lunch with your boss or your coworker, or like if you're working together, you have to leave the door open. You have to, if you wanted to run to Panera Bread, and continue working. You can't do that. And so it becomes disruptive, but it also becomes very othering for this kind of solo women that are often working in these kinds of environments.
Explain that othering word, because I think a lot of people don't totally get it.
Well, it puts you in a different situation. Let's say, for example, that I worked in Congress, right? And I worked with, mostly men. And if, half the guys I work with, which actually a number of people have this rule in Congress. And I read another article on that, and I can link to it later, but this isn't like, he's not the only guy, especially in
Pence
terms
isn't.
of, yeah. But if that was the rule, well, let's say that I worked in high up government. I could never become chummy with Pence. I could never go to drinks with him, go to dinner with him, bend his ear. It puts you at a disadvantage because usually the people in leadership are men. And we all know, I'm using politics here as, just the hustle that you do when you're in your job, sometimes in every job there is politics,
Right.
You get to know your coworkers.
Sure, right. There's relationship building.
Totally.
Right. It's a huge
and
part
decisions and deals are made over dinner and over drinks.
Yep.
So if you can't ever go with your coworkers alone and have those kinds of conversations, but then the boys club, they can go to lunch with one another, it puts you at an unfair disadvantage.
And I think the backdrop, and this is something that I've even been on a learning curve in the last few years, but when you look at the disadvantage that women have had historically across the board, women weren't allowed to vote, 70, 80 years ago. And so it just strikes, I think what you're saying is it just creates yet another situation where there's an imbalance. There's a different kind of rule. So because I have hey, how you doing?
They're not home.
Because I have a certain aspect of my anatomy, I have certain benefits, and because someone else doesn't, they don't, and it just does create an unequal playing field. The article that came out in the Post, I just love what's written here. It says the Billy Graham rule, also promotes the preservation of men and exclusion of women in positions of leadership. If a woman at work cannot meet one-on-one with her boss or colleague, her options for advancement or even being taken seriously as a colleague are extremely limited.
I agree. It's interesting. We just got a comment from someone who said, "You're judging." I don't judge him for holding that rule. Actually, not at all. I saw a ton of people mocking it this week, and I definitely have respect for anybody who is trying to preserve their marriage, who's trying to avoid getting into a compromising situation. I don't judge someone for holding that rule. I'm not, because, if for any of us who've been affected by adultery, which I certainly have pretty much my entire life, starting in childhood, but, from religious leaders or whatever, or family members or whatever, it's horribly painful. It's horribly painful for everyone involved. So I am certainly not judging Mike Pence for attempting to hold, his marriage as, super important. But what we're doing is we are talking about how that rule can be problematic in a work environment. So, I think it's possible to look at both.
Yeah, and I respect the person that said, next topic, you're judging, move on. I am judging. I think it's ridiculous. If you've been to Congress, if you've seen the environment in which these people work, we're not talking about little speakeasy, down the alley pubs or cafes. We were talking about public venues with hundreds and hundreds of government employees. And the idea that a congressman or vice president of the United States can't sit at a table and have a conversation in our public building with a woman about some policy issue, or perhaps the woman or congressman lost a husband, to me is just legalism.
Right.
And I don't understand it as a man. I am married, and I wouldn't expect that of my wife. I wouldn't expect it of myself. And so perhaps it's judging, and perhaps that's what Mike Pence needs to do to keep his zipper up, I guess, or whatever. But it just seems, as the vice president of the United States. He's excluding himself from 50% of the population whom he can't sit and have a lunch in a public, in the congressional cafeteria with,
right,
because she happens to have a vagina. It just makes no sense to me.
No, and I mean, I have to say, I have observed these rules to be just completely ineffective. I think if people are bent on going out, they're going to find a way to do it. And one of the things, that these kinds of rules can set up is like, if you're in an environment where you have to follow this rule and then you decide you want to have a one-on-one conversation with someone of the opposite sex, you end up going underground. So you can't just, if I needed to have a conversation with Paul about something and I was still living under these rules, and I did live under these rules for 15 years. I was a pastor's wife for 15 years and I followed these rules. But, I'm not in that anymore. But if I'm working with Paul, we're working on this video series, and let's say that I was still under those rules, but Paul and I wanted to have some working time together. I would either have to have like a chaperone with us, or more likely what would happen is, because I didn't want us to be seen together, I would have had to have you to my home or find some private place, because right, God forbid he and I be seen together at Chipotle, right, because that's against the rules. Yeah. And someone might, and having lived under those rules, I did go to lunch with coworkers towards the end of my stint as a pastor's wife, because I did start feeling like this is ridiculous, that I can't walk over to lunch with a fellow therapist, and I have to eat lunch alone. And I did have friends who would spot me and then come and talk to me. So anyway,
and I do appreciate...
that's tangential, but...
Betsy, yeah. And Betsy, I appreciate your honesty, and I do. And I don't think the issue here is being judgmental of all religions. I don't think this is necessarily an issue of religion. It's a unique issue. It's a nuanced issue. It's a controversial issue. But I think what I'm getting at is, if one wanted to have an affair, having lunch at Panera is going to be the last...
or Starbucks.
Or do you get what I'm trying to say? I think affairs happen in secrecy. I think affairs happen in utter secrecy. So why does having lunch with Betsy DeVos, who is the Secretary of Education, somehow against the rule? Like, how is Pence supposed to get his job done if he can't sit and have lunch with him in in the White House with people around? And so I think it's more of a logical thing, because if Pence and DeVos wanted to hook up, it's not going to be because they went and had a public lunch. So part of this is just, to me, an issue of, and I can't find the right term for it, but I don't think that having lunch with Betsy DeVos is going to lead to sexual intercourse. I actually think if that was to happen, it would happen in secret. So it's almost like there's this, it's almost like a kind of beating my chest. I don't ever eat publicly with women. Well, Pence could be having 5 affairs right now and never eating with women.
Yeah, or he could just be, looking at porn or hiring prostitutes. Or I'm not saying he is. He's probably not. But, and I think what's tough is in those situations when people are outside of that milieu, which, Christians, I am a Christian, but, Christians can be inside their bubble and forget what the rest of the world is like. So that, a coworker, somebody asks, hey, do you want to, I'm hungry, let's walk over to Starbucks and finish this meeting. And then all of a sudden you get shot down like, well, I don't meet alone with women. And then all of a sudden you feel like, oh, I just hit on you. You think I'm hitting on you. Right. Like, it's super awkward. And then it creates sexual tension. Because I have been in those situations where when I was in the ministry, we would be having a meeting and then suddenly we would find that we were the only people left in the office. And then, somebody would stand up and say, like, we've got to get out of here. And I'm like, dude, do you think I'm going to jump on you because, the admin just walked out? Like, chill out. And it's awkward. It makes everything really sexually tense and weird.
Right. It almost seems like, I don't know, and again, Betsy, I appreciate your honesty, and I know this is tricky. This is a really tricky subject.
It is.
But it almost seems like cute to me. Like, oh, that's so cute. You never have a meal with a woman, even in a public place. And that's so cute that makes you feel better. And that's really cute for you. But like you said, you could be doing all kinds of things in private that we know nothing about. And we know for a fact, and I have notes right here, Christianity Today recently released some study, or in the last year or so, on pastors who go to some website, Ashley something or other.
Oh yeah, Ashley Madison.
Like, these are evangelical pastors.
I know about it.
And this is...
Oh yeah, I know that one.
They were busted, like all these pastors were busted, and they were the ones not going to lunch with anyone.
Right.
They were the ones not going to lunch because that looks bad.
Right.
But ultimately, these issues of the heart are issues of the heart that are much deeper than the facade of, I don't ride 1 mile down the road with a woman in my car.
Well, and I think that whole thing of the issue of the heart, and now we're full out into more faith stuff than politics. So we'll get back, we'll center. But it is that issue of the heart, and to me it really comes down to, I think there is a temptation as a Christian to look at your external controls and to feel like everything is going to be okay because you follow certain rules and you follow your external controls and you don't drink and you don't all of these things. But at the end of the day, if you don't have an internal moral compass, everyone needs that, Christian or not. And the funny thing is, my married friends who are not religious, who are monogamous and choosing to be married, are just as interested in fidelity. They are just as interested in not committing adultery, and yet they seem to do it from more of an internal compass kind of place than these arbitrary rules or, because God, because Jesus. And I think it's important to cultivate both, to cultivate, your spiritual walk and, follow the principles of the Bible that you feel are important, but also to understand that outside of that, you still have behaviors and choices you have to make in your own life.
Right. And it has been a religious temptation for thousands of years to do things for the sake of how it looks to the outsiders.
Right.
And Jesus himself had a particular problem with that particular sect of Jews called the Pharisees, who worked very hard. And he said, you work so hard to clean the outside of the cup, but on the inside, it's a mess.
Right.
And I happen to think that this issue potentially falls into that category.
Yeah.
I look at how clean and look at how on the exterior all the right things that I'm doing.
Right.
But on the inside, what's truly happening. And so again, Betsy, I appreciate Mike Pence could do what he wants. I'm sure he's a very decent man. But and then we talked about business again. When you translate this into the business world, it becomes even, I said it earlier, more problematic because women are at a huge disadvantage because they can't go play golf with their boss, and they can't go have cocktails at the country club with their boss, and so that relationship building aspect is diminished.
I was kind of laughing as we were talking today about doing this topic because, 10 years ago when you were in the ministry and I was in the ministry, us even sitting here in my house and having drinks and, nobody's home would have been like, that would have been totally pearl clutching. Right? But for me, it is a much healthier place to be in where I am more motivated by my internal compass than, feeling like if I break this external rule I put up for myself, then all hell's going to break loose.
Right. And so that gets to, I'm a big John Wooden fan, and he has this quote that goes something like, reputation is merely what other people think you are, but integrity is who you truly are.
So true.
Without question, Jesus had a horrible reputation. And I have more notes in front of me that talk about, and I'm reading right now, Jesus constantly elevated the dignity of women and met with them regularly, including his meeting with a Samaritan woman in the middle of the day. And so, and she had 5 husbands. And there he is hanging out with her in the middle of the day. And I'm sure that would be against the bylaws of many evangelical churches today. But here's a woman with 5 wives in a village where everybody knew about it, and there is Jesus risking his reputation. But he knew where he was.
And someone commented and mentioned that this is all based on a comment from many years ago, and I am aware of that. However, I do suspect that he still follows that same rule.
That Pence?
Yeah. But I also think it's still an interesting conversation. Because even if Pence doesn't, which I think he probably does, which again is his right. I know there are other people in politics that do. This is if you're not in evangelical circles, you may not understand how pervasive this is. It's very pervasive. So I think it's still an interesting topic, even if Pence comes out next week and says, just kidding, I've changed my rule on that, which I doubt he has. All right, let's talk about Russia.
Russiagate.
You start.
Okay, so we have Republicans and Democrats watching 2 months ago the idea of Russia and a conspiracy with the Trump campaign was laughed at, and people were saying, people on the right were saying this is ridiculous and the story's going to go away. Not only is the story not going away, but I'm a news junkie. I watch a few news channels every night for at least an hour. And the story isn't going away. The reason the story isn't going away is because two things are true. Number one, 17 intelligence agencies concluded that Russia did affect or influence our election by hacking into the Democratic headquarters and dispersing emails that they gave to WikiLeaks. So that's a fact. But number two, the Trump administration is doubling down on just keeping quiet.
Right.
And at the same time Trump's saying it's a ruse, there's nothing there. So you have this simultaneous thing happening where there's more information coming out. Even Michael Flynn, you had the thing with Jeff Sessions.
So Mike Flynn has offered to testify in exchange for immunity. I didn't see, is there something new on that today?
It's been going on for the last 24 hours, but
yeah.
Flynn was the national security advisor.
That's a big deal. That's
Right.
a big deal. I mean, a really big deal. I mean, that indicates that there's something.
Right, and with each passing week, as people on the right are saying, shut up, it's a witch hunt, this is nothing, and the people on, left or right, but when you have Mike Pence, who was the former national security advisor who had to resign, saying he wants immunity, all that basically means is, I'll talk if you don't throw me in prison.
Right.
Which means there's something he has to say.
And it's damning.
Which is damning.
Yeah.
And so the degree of, what happened with the chairman, the House has a investigative committee, and there's a Republican and Democrat that chair it. The Republican went to the White House and spoke to Trump about it. Nunez did, which was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in my life. And I watched this stuff ever since Oliver North when I was a teenager. This is
all unprecedented.
But to go directly to the president, who is the one under investigation, and have a meeting with him without telling the committee that you're having that meeting, the thing is just getting wacky.
It is. But here's the thing, Paul. Let's say they're all busted. There was a scandal, blah, blah, blah. What's going to happen? I just feel like he keeps getting away with crazy stuff with impunity. Is this going to, let's say that we totally find out that they, absolutely affected the election and they were in cahoots with the Republican Party. What's the outcome of that?
What will happen is we will have a president who will have a press conference with Angela Merkel, but won't sit next to her at the podium because he won't sit next to a woman.
But is he going to be impeached for this?
That was supposed to be a joke.
I know.
Okay, that was a bad joke.
That was crazy.
Yeah, he could easily be impeached. If it keeps going on, and Flynn basically says, so the big question is going to be, did Trump know that his campaign was in cahoots with the Russians? And if you guys don't get all this, the bottom line is that Russia has been trying for years to try to find ways to become the superpower again.
Right.
And one of the ways they want to become the superpower is by getting the U.S. to lift their sanctions and to lift their stance in NATO. Russia basically wants to start taking over some of these Eastern European countries again. And one way to do that is to get the U.S. to say to NATO, we don't really care that much anymore. Which, by the way, Trump has done that.
Right.
Trump has never criticized Russia.
Right.
And so it seems like, to me, the biggest pink elephant in the room is Donald Trump will criticize China.
Yeah.
He'll criticize Mexico. He will criticize everyone on the planet, but never once has he criticized Russia.
Or Israel.
Or Israel. Yeah, that goes without saying. Yeah. Or Putin. And that's just weird because it adds to this kind of conspiracy that, wait, why are you being so favorable to Russia? And so I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I am the furthest thing from a conspiracy theorist on this planet.
You are.
But the more I watch this, the more I think, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, something something.
And to me, it's a bipartisan issue. It's not
I
because
agree.
I'm a Republican.
Yeah.
I'm like John McCain saying, hey, we got to figure this out because this is a national security issue.
Well, I mean, when you look at, in terms of the partisan stuff, when you look at kind of the core values of Republicans, this actually seems like more of an affront to Republicans.
Yeah, totally.
Because
Totally.
you guys are all about,
Right. Yeah, national security and
Totally.
the bad Russians.
Yeah. It's bizarro.
It is.
And then it just starts to look like this sort of, even outside of our own government, like this sort of world power domination crazy stuff. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist either,
Yeah.
but what the hell?
Right. And then with Trump not releasing his tax returns, and again, this
Yeah.
might seem wacky, but apparently he has investments with Russia that go back decades.
Yeah.
And why was he so adamant about, and again, I want Trump to succeed. I want him to succeed as a president for the sake of the good of men and women, not just in this country, but around the world. But this is a big problem.
It's a big problem. And I can't say that I want him to succeed. I'm hoping he gets impeached for something because I don't trust him for anything. I don't trust him at all.
Yeah.
I don't think that he will do anything for the good of the people.
Yeah.
My confidence is low.
And so the big winner, so Trump campaigned on this idea of I'm a winner, I'm a big negotiator, I cut deals, these Washington
Part of the
boneheads
deal.
don't know how to get stuff done, and I'm going to go in, I'm going to make stuff happen, I'm going to repeal and replace Obamacare immediately.
Yep.
And guess what? Politics is nuance. It's tough business.
It
and
is.
he got flicked on the forehead
He did.
by the House that basically
Hard.
said, F off, dude. And he lost.
He did. So, in case you weren't following, last week the Republicans brought a bill to the floor to replace Obamacare. It was crap.
Yeah,
it
it
was
wasn't good.
unresearched, unthought out
Yep.
crap. And it would have been very harmful for people. It would have been harmful for all American citizens. This just would have been bad. And it was seen as bad enough that, the Republicans control
Yeah.
politics right now, and they couldn't even get it through.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is the way that he yanked it before it went to vote. I
Yeah.
mean, what was that about?
They just knew. They knew they didn't have the votes, and it was easier to say we're pulling it than him actually losing on a vote.
Yeah.
But, I mean...
Which is super prideful.
It is. But to the Trump supporters, respectfully, that thought he's a businessman, he's a CEO, he knows how to get stuff done, no question, if you're a CEO, Trump would know how to get things done. But we have balance of powers.
Right.
We have very smart
We don't
members.
have a CEO of the United States.
We have House members who are black and white. They're
Yeah.
women. They're Muslim. They're liberal. They're conservative. They're from
Right.
Arkansas. They're from L.A.
Yeah.
It's not easy to show up and just power your way through. And he
Right.
found out and learned a dismal lesson.
That was just cringy.
It was so cringy.
So cringy. So you look at Trump's legacy thus far and the campaign promises. He said he would drain the swamp, and instead he appointed, his entire,
Cabinet and
his
everyone else.
entire cabinet is just a parade of special interest.
Right.
So he didn't drain the swamp. He said he'd change Obamacare. Obamacare remains the law of their land, and they had plenty of time over the last 4 years of bitching about it to come up with something better, and they didn't.
These travel bans.
The travel bans have been shut down. Not that I'm complaining about any of this, but his presidency is not going well.
No, it's maybe the worst first 100 days in the history of recorded. And it just goes to show, again, I was saying this a year ago when we were talking about it, this is nuance. Politics is nuance.
Yeah.
And it takes more than sound bites and
Right.
beating your chest to get stuff done.
Right.
And again, I hope the best for him. But with Russia, there's a real division in Washington, and we're just getting started.
Yeah. Over under, how long do you think before he gets impeached?
Over under.
Right?
The hard part with that is just going to be linking. They have graphs, you can Google them, of all the various players who are involved in this, Paul Manafort, and there's a long list. But the big question is going to be how much Trump knew, and that's going to be ultimately what determines whether there's an impeachment proceeding or an independent counsel. The Democrats are calling for an independent counsel, but the problem is the Republicans control the House and the Senate, and so in order for there to be an independent counsel called, there would have to be a majority vote, and that's not happening. But when you have Michael Flynn, I mean, this is like a career 30-year highest level Republican who is now asking for immunity. I mean, that just basically means he has information that would put his ass behind bars, and he's asking for immunity. That doesn't look very good.
But in addition to having information that would put him behind bars, he also has enough fear that it's going to come out anyway, that he's trying to preempt.
Right.
I mean, that's why you would ask for immunity, is because your assumption is it's going to come out. Otherwise, if you think you're going to die with your secret, you wouldn't say anything. So, you know, I think he's a little bit the canary in the coal mine by asking for immunity. Because he sees that the risk of it happening outweighs being quiet.
And to those of you watching that are Republicans, you have to understand I'm one of you. I say all of this with a sense of frustration and humiliation. I'm a John McCain, Lindsey Graham Republican who is, who just is. I just wish we had somebody in the seat like Jeb Bush, perhaps, or John Kasich, who I wrote in, who would at least bring a certain kind of dignity and respect and consistency and decorum to the office. And instead we have this pandemonium that continues. And a lot of experts think that ultimately Trump, he's much more like, a 17th century monarch. That this whole thing going on is much more based on how a monarch who appoints his children and in-laws into major posts. And ultimately, Trump is reading history books, and he wants to go down as the monarch of the United States of America, and he's running the country that way.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. I mean, and there have been many parallels made, to fascism and the way he's running the country as well. I mean, it's really scary, and the propaganda and we haven't even talked about
we have so much talk with the media.
The attempts to control the press. I mean, it's frightening. Like, what politician, wants to he wants to be in control of disseminating information that his country gets, that the citizens of his country get their information from him and not from the press.
Fake news, really alternative facts. We have so much to talk about.
I know. Okay, well, let's end there. Hit us up in the comments and let us know what your thoughts are about our upcoming podcast and these continuing conversations, what you'd like to hear more about, what you think we should call our podcast, and we will be back shortly to talk more.
There are some great comments, so join us later to answer them.
Awesome.
And thanks for commenting.
All right, bye guys.